For the call. I want to read into the record only a few remarks. I want to acknowledge the role of the Minister in the lead up to this phase of the legislation. He has been not only consultative, but actually we have something resembling a consensus on this legislation. I want to acknowledge the Minister's role in his consultative behaviours, and I want to return soon to the issue of consensus in respect of other aspects of electoral law reform. I want to endorse the remarks of my colleague Charles Chauvel in respect of the regards that he paid to the two organisations who are being taken out by this legislation and being replaced by one, and to thank them for their efforts, including the really rather interesting phase in our electoral history when we made the move from first past the post to proportional representation mid-last decade, and the challenges that arose for those organisations. In fact, one of them was set up precisely because we'd made that change, the Electoral Commission. The third is to point out that the good work and the harmonious and accurate nature of our elections has not always been the case. And although we have 150-something years of elections during which time no shot has been fired, and we can be pretty pleased about the long history of change of governments backwards and forwards over those decades. The second part of the second leg of the double for this amendment bill is to fold in the Electoral Enrolment Centre, and in recent times the electoral enrolment processes in this country have been a joke. Not that recent, actually I'm referring to the 1978 election, when the rolls were hugely inflated by hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people who were either non-existent or who were double counted on more than one roll. In the event, I suspect the amount of dual voting that took place was not huge, but the reason that happened was that in the 75-78 period, the then government decided to give the job of putting the rolls together to the Ministry of Justice, and to cut a long story short, they stuffed it up. Post-78, it was put out to tender, and it was taken up by New Zealand Post, or whatever that predecessor name was, and since then has been managed by the Electoral Enrolment Centre as part of New Zealand Post. So I'm making that point because it is within living memory. And things can go wrong in modern democracies, and sometimes they do. And whether it's the hanging chads of Florida or the mess that we saw a few decades ago in our country, these are very expensive mistakes. And I'm saying that to the House because I do hope that the next piece of legislation, the second leg of the double, is one that has been written with the lessons of that history in mind. I want to make a point about consensus, and to say that we do not, it appears, yet have consensus in this House. In fact, by one perspective, we've never particularly had it. I'll explore that a little. But we do not have consensus, or broad consensus, or mostly consensus, on what I think will be the next few bills regarding electoral reform as it applies to donations and spending caps and parallel campaigning and all of these things. We know what we're talking about here. And I don't want to talk about the issues, I want to talk about the value of consensus. Now, I do acknowledge we've never had it, but in the 80s and in the 90s, where there was near consensus through those decades, and they were turbulent enough in general, but as far as electoral law concerned, they were rather quiescent. The main point of contention was when the rolls should close. Should they close 28 days prior, or should they close the evening prior? And as governments changed in that time, so did the electoral law. And the point of this is that because the electoral law is part of our constitution, we always say that we've got an unwritten constitution. In fact, we've got it written in several places, and the rest of it's just tradition or by arrangement. But this is part of our written constitution, and it is not a good idea for the written constitution to change reliably upon the change of government. If one's to address that, the question is, how do you get somewhere close to a near consensus on it? And we are some distance away in respect of donation spending caps and parallel campaigning. Now, let me put it on the record that the electoral law that existed in this House in the time of the last election is not one that I think this party would die in the ditch over. That is to say, we would be up for negotiation. I think that is the mood on this side of the House. We'll see whether other speakers condone that sentiment. But it's also important that the government's opening bid is not its last, that we do need to make some sort of attempt to close or partially close the gap. No, it isn't consensus. It's a movement towards some sort of agreed plank that's broad enough that all parties can find. Well, status quo is not consensus. You see, the thing about the status quo is that if one reflects on the status quo and says that's the point, there is not consensus, therefore the status quo, because we haven't got consensus about where we can move to, therefore we can't move at all. If that's the line that the national government takes, I hope they don't, but if that's the line that they take, then we will be changing our constitution every time we change the government. Bad idea, because it changes reliably. Indeed, I accept the member's comment, absolutely. We've got our side, we've got our set of truths, which I won't rehearse here, about whether or not we attempted to achieve consensus. But we certainly, whether we attempted to or not, failed. No doubt about that. And I do think that saying that we cannot move anywhere from the status quo because we have not got the perfect position to land isn't very smart. And I think that we should think afresh about whether we can move closer so that, if you will, parties are equally unhappy about the way that the electoral law stands. Then there's more or less a balance of terror, and quite possibly the electoral law would withstand endless changes of government without having endless tweaks or endless big changes in the electoral law. So if it's to be part of our constitution, one of the things about our constitution is that it's supposed to be reasonably reliable. And if we don't manage to get somewhere closer to agreement or broad agreement or equal unhappiness or something like that, then we will be in a position where as a nation we're going to change part of our constitution every time there's a change in the government. And that is just wrong. So I'm saying to the national members opposite, I don't think we've got that aspect of our electoral law correct or anywhere near. I'm saying, for me anyway, that I think we would be wide open to a negotiating position which left us somewhat uncomfortable. That's the nature of a deal. But I do not think that defending the status quo on the basis that there's no consensus on the point of destination, I think that is just wrong.